Please welcome the President's Own United States Marine Band. Ladies and gentlemen, joining the Marine Band, please welcome back the United States Navy Band Sea Chanters.
America,
Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your tables. The program will begin shortly.
Somewhere a trumpet sounds in the night, a sailor is standing there. It's calling him out to the stars and the stripes, it's calling him God knows where.
He kisses the ones he loves goodbye and leaves in the dead of night. For freedom he'll heed the call, leave all he knows, and for freedom he'll stand and fight.
And somewhere a man and wife can't believe they're waving their girl goodbye. Forgot all the days of pigtails and curls and candlelit lullabies.
If they had their way, she'd stay young forever and never be far from home. But freedom has drawn her heart to danger shore, and for freedom they'll let her go.
And somewhere a thunderous crash in the night, it echoes all through the hills. Though many escape its wrath and its rage, a sailor lies wounded still.
Remembering the land he loves, he cries, I love you with all my might. For freedom said I'm her son, whatever comes, and for freedom I'll say goodbye.
Somewhere beneath the stars and the sky, our flag is still standing there. She bled and she bought one land under God. Her colors still lead us there.
Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your tables. The program will begin shortly.
What difference if I hail from north or south, or from the east or west? My heart is filled with love for all of these. I only know I swell with pride, and deep within my breast I thrill to see how glory paint the breeze. This is my country, land of my choice. This is my country, hear my proud voice. I pledge my allegiance, America, America. This is my country to have and to hold.
There's a feeling that's a stealing, and it sets my brain a reeling when I'm listening to the music of a military band. Any tune like Yankee Doodle simply sets me off my noodle. It's that patriotic something that no one can understand. That melody untiring, ain't that inspiring? Hurrah, hurrah, we'll join the Jubilee. And that's going some for the Yankees, by gum, red, white, and blue. I am for you, honest, you're a grand old flag. You're a grand old flag, you're a high-flying flag, and forever in peace may you wave. You're the emblem of the land I love, the home of the free and the brave. Every heart beats true for the red, white, and blue, where there's never a post or brand. But you
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Secretary of the Interior, David Bernhardt.
Good evening and welcome. What a beautiful evening. To our distinguished guests, on behalf of the Department of the Interior and the National Park Service, it is a privilege to participate in a celebration for our great nation, honoring the brave men and women who have served and continue to serve in our armed forces. Last night, for the first time in more than a decade, fireworks illuminated the sky over the Mount Rushmore National Memorial. It was an event that would not have happened without the leadership and the enthusiasm of President Trump. For those of you that were not there, it was spectacular, and the president's speech was unifying and inspiring. The Department of the Interior and the National Park Service serve as the stewards and guardians of our nation's memorials, monuments, and battlefields. For 87 years, the National Park Service has cared for the south lawn of the White House and the Ellipse, both of which are part of President's Park. President's Park was designed by President Washington and Pierre L'Enfant. The history of this space is unparalleled in telling America's story. I also want to remind everybody that it was on July 3rd that John Adams described in 1776 his vision for how we should celebrate our nation's independence. He said it would be marked with pomp and parade, with shows, games, sports, guns, bells, bonfires, and illuminations, from one end of the continent to the other. 244 years later, President Trump fosters Adams' vision, even in times of challenge, and as we've seen over the last 2 days, he's given him a run for his money. Adams recognized that the celebration of independence would bring the American people together. By doing so, we can each reflect upon and appreciate those founding principles and freedoms that unite us. President Trump recognizes that these principles must be guarded and protected to be maintained. Often, the responsibility of protecting our freedoms from assault has fallen to those who served in our armed services. So tonight, we recognize and express our appreciation to all the men and women who have served and fought for the principles and freedoms that make America a great nation. Thank you. Happy Independence Day, and God bless America.
equipment that we needed urgently to treat our patients of COVID-19. But what I mainly appreciate is that you have never sought to impose anything on us, violating our sovereignty. Instead of the Monroe Doctrine, you have followed, in our case, the wise advice of illustrious and prudent George Washington, who said, quote, "Nations should not take advantage of the unfortunate condition of other peoples," end of quote. You have not tried to treat us as a colony. On the contrary, you have honored our condition as an independent nation. That's why I'm here, to express to the people of the United States that their president has behaved with us with kindness and respect. You have treated us just as what we are, a country and a dignified people, a free, democratic, and sovereign people. Long live the friendship of our two nations. Long live the United States of America. Long live Canada. Long live our America. Long live Mexico. Long live Mexico. Viva Mexico.
crime and bring them swiftly to justice. In Syria, the actions of the Assad regime, Russia, and China to constrict the flow of life-saving supplies, medicine, and food have exacerbated an already terrible humanitarian situation on the ground. Just yesterday, Russia and China once again vetoed action at the UN Security Council that would have maintained humanitarian access to desperate Syrian communities. Over the last several months, Russia and the People's Republic of China have repeatedly abused their veto powers in the Council to support the Assad regime's strategy of starving its own people. Their calculus is clear. They believe there's no price to pay for their actions to the Security Council. They believe their partnership with the Assad regime will render political and economic benefits that outweigh any cost of conscience or moral obligation. It's our job, the responsible nations of the world, to increase those costs, document the human impact of these decisions, and use this example to remind the world of what these two regimes stand for. I also want to address the deteriorating and immobile oil storage vessel, the Saphir, that's floating off in the Red Sea. Some of you will remember, I've spoken about this before, I think. The tanker contains 4 times the oil spilled in the Exxon Valdez disaster. If it ruptures, it will devastate the Red Sea ecosystem and disrupt key shipping lanes in the Red Sea and the Bab el-Mandeb. A disaster like that could prevent desperately needed food aid from reaching a Yemeni population already in terrible, dire conditions. The Houthis have blocked UN officials who need to board the vessel and in order that they may do the work necessary to prevent massive environmental damage throughout the region. The Houthis must grant access before this ticking time bomb explodes. And speaking of the Houthis and bombs, last week, a United Nations report confirmed that the weapon shipments the United States interdicted back in November of 2019, and then again in February of this year, were of Iranian origin. You'll recall that when we said that, the Iranians denied it. The UN has now confirmed this. Iran is not abiding by the UN arms embargo restrictions that are due to expire in less than 4 months now. Now we've interdicted another shipment of weapons heading to the Houthis. On June 28th, U.S. and partner forces interdicted a vessel off the coast of Yemen with illicit cargo, including 200 RPGs, more than 1,700 AK rifles, 21 surface-to-air and land attack missiles, several anti-tank missiles, and other advanced weapons and missiles. The Security Council must extend the arms embargo on Iran to prevent further conflict in the region. No serious person can possibly believe Iran would use any weapon it receives for peaceful ends. Contrast the Islamic Republic of Iran's illegal gun running with America's work to help our allies and partners defend themselves. On Monday, we notified Congress of $7.5 billion worth of defense sales, from new rotorcraft capabilities for countries like Lithuania and Indonesia, to new ISR platforms for NATO ally France, to increased infantry mobility in the Stryker platform for Argentina. The United States is meeting the high demand for our allies and partners for American gear to defend their nations. We're strengthening our security partnerships, building capacity, and supporting the American manufacturing base. And now turning to Africa, we're making progress in helping Sudan's transition to a more democratic and peaceful way of life. At the Sudan Partnership Conference back on June 25th, the United States announced it will provide $356.2 million to support the Sudan democratic transition, including more than $85 million in development and COVID-19 assistance. And finally, I'll close here, as one of our expanding security relationship with the Republic of Cyprus. For the first time, the Department of State intends to provide international military education and training funding to that country, contingent on congressional appropriations and our notification of Congress. This is part of our efforts to enhance relationships with key regional partners to promote stability in the Eastern Mediterranean. Happy to take some questions.
Nadia, go ahead. Good morning, Mr. Secretary.
Nadia, hi.
You opposed the release of Mr. Qasim Tajuddin, although you said that you abide by the court decision. Does this hinder your effort to go after high target financier of Hezbollah like Mr. Tajuddin? And what does it say to the people who oppose Hezbollah and the people who are trying to support them financially. And in that regard, for the first time, we hear Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of the group, yesterday saying that he welcomes U.S. assistance to the Lebanese government. Do you see that, although he said U.S. is an enemy, but do you see this as a way of trying to open some kind of dialogue with the U.S., considering that they released this person, Mr. Tajuddin?
Yeah. So we do everything we can to enforce the sanctions that we have put in place against terrorist figures, including those who have been designated under the Hezbollah designations. We've urged other countries to designate Hezbollah a terrorist organization as well. We continue to believe that they present an enormous risk, and their behavior indicates that they are, in fact, a terrorist organization that is intent on causing harm to the West, and most in particular to our partner and ally in the region, Israel. Second, I didn't see the remarks that you described from Nasrallah. I did see him say that they should take Iranian oil. That I saw. That would be unacceptable for them to do that. It would be sanctioned product for sure, and we'll do everything we can to make sure that Iran cannot continue to sell crude oil anywhere, including to Hezbollah in the region, so that that the resources that fund and underwrite the world's largest state-sponsored terror won't be made available to them because they were able to sell some crude oil product or some petroleum product to Hezbollah.
Sorry, just to follow up quickly, but many people will see the release of Mr. Tajuddin as a victory for Hezbollah, and they might be using it as that, and this is why he said we welcome any U.S. assistance and we don't mind it.
Yeah, there can be no mistake what the United States has done and will continue to do to put pressure on Hezbollah, and also to try and assist the people of Lebanon at building out a successful government. The other component here, of course, is Lebanon's incredible struggle to conduct the reforms that are necessary to make sure that the Lebanese people who have been protesting in the streets, simply demanding a government that's not corrupt, that is engaged in behavior that benefits the Lebanese people, that's our mission set. Hezbollah is a terrorist organization, and we are supportive of Lebanon as long as they get the reforms right, and they are not a proxy state for Iran in Lebanon. We have a very bad thing for the people throughout Lebanon, and we hope that doesn't happen in Beirut.
Nick Shifrin?
Good morning, Mr.
Hey,
President.
Nick.
Thank you very much. Can we do WHO and Iran, if I could?
Sure,
US,
give it a shot.
U.S. law mandates that the administration follow through on the financial pledges to the WHO before the withdrawal next year. Can you tell us how much the U.S. has paid of that, and whether you intend to follow through on the commitments? And Iran, what's the message Iranian leaders should draw from the explosion at Natanz? Do you believe it was accidental or deliberate?
I'm not going to talk about the second question. With respect to the first one, we provided notice yesterday to Capitol Hill of our intent to withdraw from the World Health Organization, something we had talked about, and we had communicated to Congress even in the informal process that this was our intention. The President, we formally did that from the State Department yesterday, consistent with the President's guidance. We will work with Congress with respect to the appropriated funds. We'll get it right. I loved it. We are not going to underwrite an organization that has historically been incompetent and not performed its fundamental function. There's a real focus on the failures that took place around Wuhan and the World Health Organization's fundamental inability to perform its basic core mission of preventing a global pandemic spread. But don't forget the history. This is an institution that got it wrong on SARS, it got it wrong on Ebola. The United States had to create its own system, PEPFAR, to do the work to prevent and come up with solutions to the HIV/AIDS problem. We did that. The United States did that. The World Health Organization has a long history of corruption and politicization. And it's not that it doesn't get some pieces of their program right. That's certainly true. But on balance, this organization has not been able to deliver on its core mission for decades. We tried, Nick, desperately. And we, in fact, got some reforms through back a handful of years ago. But the WHO leadership clearly has been able to execute and implement them in a way that can prevent the kind of global pandemic that has destroyed hundreds of thousands of lives and cost the global economy trillions and trillions of dollars. That is not an organization that the administration has any intention of underwriting.
Marina, go ahead. So, about
Brazil. Do you think President Jair Bolsonaro should change his approach to the virus now that he has tested positive? And also, when will U.S. allow people who are traveling from Brazil to enter the country? Is there a number of cases or deaths that Brazil needs to reach in order to that?
So President Bolsonaro is perfectly capable of making his own decision about how to proceed with the health situation in his own country. I spoke with the Foreign Minister Rajo yesterday about that and many other things with respect to our relationship with a great partner and friend of ours. As for when we can get travel back open between our two countries, the relationship with Brazil is no different than any other country. We are putting in place a set of metrics that will determine when it's appropriate and safe for the American people to allow travel to come from other countries. We'll evaluate each country separately and make informed decisions based on science and reason, not politics. We're going to get this right. We're going to make sure that we do everything we can to get our economy back open just as quickly as we can. We have a big team here at State, we have a big team at Department of Transportation, at DHS, Vice President's Task Force, all looking at this challenge. We want to get international travel back up and going just as quickly as we can. That includes with our great friends in South America, including Brazil.
Christian?
Thanks, Mr. Secretary. A couple of questions. First, on COVID, curious if we could get some updates on the negotiations to end the travel restrictions with the European Union. And then secondly, you said yesterday the administration is looking at banning TikTok. I'm curious how serious this ban consideration is. India banned it almost overnight with very little thought. And how soon can we expect that to go into effect?
So with respect to the conversations with the EU, we've actually made some progress thinking about how to do that. So it's unlikely to be the case that it'll be on and off. That is, we will attempt to put in some procedures and protocols that protect both citizens here in the United States from the spread, and it's a global challenge, and we want to make sure that European citizens aren't impacted adversely by travel from the West as well. Lots of people not only come from America, but transit through America to Europe. So you've got to deal with all the complexity that comes with it. But we've made some real progress, technical progress, and now we need to draw that to a conclusion, and then there'll be a system to monitor and measure to make sure that we get the timing right and we get the toggle switches right. Both sides of the Atlantic want to get this back open. Both sides understand that our economies depend on it. The deep, important transatlantic relationship matters. These are two Western democracies that have a lot of good work to do together, and getting those travel nodes hooked back up and connected again is an important thing. With respect to TikTok, I want to put it in the broader context. We have been engaged in a constant evaluation about ensuring that we protect the privacy of American citizens and their information as it transits. So this doesn't relate to any one particular business or company, but rather to American national security. And we are striving to get that light. The comments that I made about a particular company earlier this week fall in the context of us evaluating the threat from the Chinese Communist Party. We've talked about it in the context of ZTE, we've talked about it in the context of Huawei, and we are now evaluating each instance where we believe that U.S. citizens' data that they have on their phones or in their system or in their healthcare records, we want to make sure that the Chinese Communist Party doesn't have a way to easily access that. And so what you'll see the administration do is take actions that preserve and protect that information and deny the Chinese Communist Party access to the private information that belongs to Americans. It's a big project because we've got partners all around the world where infrastructure crosses Chinese technology and then comes to the United States. So one should think about this as a project of real scale and real importance. We must get this right. The infrastructure of this next 100 years must be a communications infrastructure that's based on a Western ideal of private property and protection of private citizens' information in a transparent way. That is not the model that Chinese Communist Party software and hardware companies are engaged in.
Hudson?
Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Hi.
To spirit countries,
You look like you got a great question, just all over your face. I can just see it.
I try to bring some Midwest optimism.
Fantastic. That's awesome. Me too.
Good. So, disparate countries from Taiwan to Germany have managed to flatten the curve, but the U.S. has the highest number of cases of COVID in the world. Do you still believe the U.S. is a world leader on the pandemic? And just to put it directly, Was the U.S. involved in any way in the Natanz explosion?
Take your first question. Of course the U.S. remains the world leader in the pandemic. It almost goes without saying. And there are multiple dimensions, and I've talked about each of them. Certainly the Vice President's task force talks about them as well. But whether that is the technical scientific solutions, both to how to stop the spread, whether that's therapeutics or vaccines, the world turns its eyes to the best scientists and researchers and practitioners of the sciences that will ultimately bring resolution to this problem. It's the United States that the world looks to. When it comes to countries, small countries, whether that's in Central Asia or in Africa, their eyes turn to the United States. It's not remotely close who's provided the most assistance to these nations to try and solve what are vexing problems in their countries with very little medical infrastructure. And so, yes, there is no doubt that the United States has been and will remain the world's leader when it comes to not only pandemic response, but global healthcare infrastructure systems and processes that take down the very risks that we described. It's good. We have friends and partners in this too. The Western democracies, that model is the one that is most likely to prevail and prevent this kind of thing from happening again. What we found in China is the Chinese Communist Party was simply incapable. And you see it with the arrest that I referred to in my remarks. They're incapable of being transparent, of accepting criticism, of allowing reporters to ask them questions that they find uncomfortable, that elicit the truth and the facts. We still have significant questions about who patient zero was. We're now 6 months on at least from when this began. And the Chinese Communist Party, that authoritarian model, simply can't prevent the kind of inquiry, or has to prevent that kind of inquiry because they're afraid. They're afraid that the truth will be something that will not shine a happy light on what took place. And so instead they chose to hide and obfuscate and deny basic truth, basic scientific truths about what took place. This is a fundamental and fatal flaw for authoritarian regimes, and it's why the Chinese Communist Party has to be held accountable. And your second question was about the explosion in Natanz. I don't have anything to add.
Do you think the Israelis were involved?
I just don't have any comment. Thanks.
Victor, go ahead.
Thank you. On the visit of the Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador, the Mexican delegation has been clear that they want this meeting to be only about trade and coronavirus. But I'd like to know if you will put on the table issues like the human rights or human trafficking with concerns on freedom of the press, for example. And if I may, I'd like to know the status of the merit initiative and the need to upgrade or review the cooperation on anti-narcotics or security, especially after the attack to Mexican officials in Mexico City.
Yeah. So it's the President's meeting. He'll put on the table precisely what he chooses to, and I'm sure President Obrador will do that as well. But I'm confident the meeting will talk about the full range of issues that we work on with the Mexican government. Certainly the economic issues. We want to talk about our border, how we make sure that we keep that border, that commercial traffic up and successful. Very important American supply chains, Canadian supply chains that you can see come into full force under the USMCA. We've got to make sure we get that right, and so I know they'll talk about that. I'm confident that the full range of issues. I'm sure we'll talk about issues that expand beyond bilateral as well. Things in the hemisphere, right? What's taking place in Venezuela today, challenges that we find to narcotics trafficking in both the Pacific and the Atlantic, places where Mexico can help. So I'm confident that the full range of issues you asked. You mentioned several others. I'm very confident that the discussion will be complete and comprehensive. I expect we'll have a good set of meetings with them today in the afternoon, and then again this evening at the working dinner as well. With that, I've got time for one more.
Lily, go ahead.
Thank you, Secretary. Following up on your remarks about Beijing's pattern of instigating boundary dispute, you know what has happened with India, China's aggressive behavior against India in Leh and Ladakh. What is the situation? What is the assessment of the situation between India and China right now?
So I've spoken with Foreign Minister Jaishankar a number of times about this. The Chinese took incredibly aggressive action. The Indians have done their best to respond to that. I put this in the context of General Secretary Xi Jinping and his behavior throughout the region and indeed throughout the world. I don't think it's possible to look at that particular instance of Chinese Communist Party aggression in isolation. I think you need to put it in the larger context. When I was up here once before, we talked about the number of both maritime and boundary disputes that the Chinese Communist Party has engaged in. I think it's unequaled any place else in the world. There aren't many neighbors that can satisfactorily say that they know where their sovereignty ends and that the Chinese Communist Party will respect that sovereignty. That's certainly true now for the people of Bhutan as well. This is what the world must come together to respond to. This increasing revisionist effort that the Chinese Communist Party is engaged in is something that President Trump has taken incredibly seriously. The United States hadn't done that in previous administrations. We respond to this in a way that we think is appropriate, and we have attempted to communicate to the Chinese leadership that we are serious about this. When I say we, it's not just the United States. We will start very shortly a dialogue with our EU friends on how we collectively can respond to this challenge from the Chinese Communist Party, and I am confident. I'm confident that I think what's happened with the spread of this virus from Wuhan, China, I think the world has seen the true colors of the Chinese Communist Party, and I am convinced more than ever that the free peoples of the world will come to understand the threat that's presented, not only internally inside of China, but importantly that the impact that General Secretary Xi has on the world is not good for free peoples and democracy-loving peoples, and the world will come together to respond to that in a way that is powerful and important and will preserve sovereign nations operating under the rule of law in the way that we have all come accustomed to and benefits people all across the world. Thank you. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to take off. Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.
Stage. Against social distancing guidelines in school, things that are included in those guidelines now, like placing desks apart from each other, staggering school times, against those elements of it?
So I'm not going to get into each and every element and where he stands on it. The president wants us to go back to school safely. Our children depend on it. These schools are essential, and I think he stands on the side of parents across this country who want to see their kids back in school, who want to see, make sure that their kids don't fall behind in education. Yes, Christine.
Thank you, Kayleigh. By this point in the 2016 campaign, President Trump had been talking about what would ultimately become the USMCA for more than 9 months. So when do you think we can expect President Trump to detail his priorities for a second term?
I think you hear him talk about it quite often. More trade deals are on the horizon from this president, lower taxes, more funding for our schools. One announcement that I do have for you is that in CARES Act 4, he's looking to substantially bump up money for education, but at the same time understand that this money should go to students. So that's one priority we're looking at more in the immediate term, supporting our schools, supporting our families. He's talked about payouts, stimulus payouts to Americans that worked very well the first time. It's something he's mentioned for a phase 4. He's talked about payroll tax holiday, which would be a big tax break for America's workers. So those are a few in the immediate term, and you'll be hearing a lot more about a second term in the coming months.
Do you think he might detail some of those priorities in his speech this Saturday at the rally in New Hampshire?
So I don't want to get ahead of his speech this Saturday, but you'll certainly be hearing in coming speeches more about the president's vision for the second term. Building the economy is one thing that he mentioned just this week. You know, he brought the hottest economy in modern history once. He wants to do it again. He did that through deregulation, through lower taxes, and that led to historic low unemployment for Black Americans, Hispanic Americans, disabled, our veterans, and those are the kind of policies, conservative policies he's looking at for a second term.
And anything that you could say to Republicans on Capitol Hill who have talked to reporters and said that they would like President Trump to perhaps be a bit more forceful about what exactly he would intend to do?
Well, the president's been very clear. I mean, I just mentioned to you what he wants in CARES Act 4. He's mentioned some other things, so I think he's very vocal about what he wants, and you'll be hearing more from him. Justin.
Thanks. I had one on Hong Kong, but I first wanted to just follow on the rally question. Just before you came out, the director of the Tulsa Health Department said that the president's rally very likely contributed to a surge in coronavirus cases in the city. We know that allies and advisors of the president also have tested positive since Tulsa, and in New Hampshire, masks are recommended but not required. So I'm wondering first why the president continues not to require masks at his rallies, considering we've seen the public health outcomes that come from it, and whether that or other changes are something that he might look at going forward.
The president's been operating in accordance with CDC guidelines, recommended but not required. But as he said recently, if he weren't tested every day and he was in a situation where he couldn't distance, he would wear masks. We hand them out. They're handed out by the campaign, rather, at these events, and there's ample hand sanitizer, and it's people's individual choice as to whether to go.
Do you have a response to the Tulsa Health Director sort of
I would just say that I have no data to indicate that on my end, but it's the decision of individuals whether to go. We encourage the wearing of masks. As the president said, if he couldn't distance, he would, but it's the individual choice of the person.
On Hong Kong, I know the Chief of Staff, National Security Advisor, have talked in the last couple of days indicating that the president might both sign the bill that was passed by Congress last week and hinted at additional action. So I'm wondering both if you have any updated guidance on the timing of those things, but also we've heard concern from U.S. companies that sort of aggressive sanctions that would be unlocked under the latest bill could hurt their businesses in Hong Kong and China. And so I'm wondering if you could kind of talk through the administration's thoughts about balancing how aggressively you would be sanctioning Chinese officials versus U.S. business interests.
So I'm not going to get ahead of the president on what our actions on China will be, but you will be hearing about some upcoming actions that pertain to China, so I can confirm that. Yes.
Yes. Thank you, Kayleigh. So still on Hong Kong, this morning Robert O'Brien said that China has basically annexed Hong Kong. Can you explain what he means by that and what the administration plans to do about it?
I think his words are quite clear. We've been quite clear from this podium that Hong Kong's special status is at risk because of the Chinese actions.
So, just to follow up on annexation, what are the administration's plans on actual plans of annexation from the Israeli on parts of the West Bank?
So I won't get ahead of the president on those actions. Yes. Jeff.
Thanks, Kayleigh. You mentioned education before. The president said in his tweet this morning that he might take funding away. First of all, why would he want to take funding away from schools? Second of all, which funding is he referring to specifically? And thirdly, what authority does he have to do that, given that most public schools are funded by local property taxes?
So I would note that what I said to Kristen just a bit ago, he wants to increase funding in CARES for education, but he's looking at potentially redirecting that to make sure it goes to the student, and it is most likely tied to the student and not to a district where schools are closed. And I would note that he said this is something he may consider in the tweet.
No, I heard what you said with regard to CARES, but with regard to the president, he was saying that as I guess, a threat if Democratic governors or officials don't open schools in the way that he wants them. I'm just wondering, again, what authority he would use to do that and which specific funds he's targeting.
Yeah, not in the ways that he'd want them to open. He wants them to reopen altogether. He wants students to be welcomed back to these schools because there are real consequences. Let's be clear about what we're talking about here. We're talking about a situation where you have the American Academy of Pediatrics talking about the negative impacts of children not in schools. Learning deficits is among them. There's increases in child and adolescent physical or sexual abuse because you don't have people reporting and notifying, like teachers and PE teachers and school personnel notifying health departments when they see signs of this. You have increased substance abuse, depression, and suicidal ideation, and this is from the American Academy of Pediatrics. So the president, he's going to push schools to reopen. These are grave consequences. Even CNN reporting that experts believe that the recent decline in calls to child abuse and neglect hotlines might really mean more cases are going unnoticed. This is unacceptable, and our schools are essential, and our teachers are essential workers, and he wants them to open, and that's why he's speaking out so strongly about this.
Would he accept, Kayleigh, that the schools and the districts that are looking at this want to do it in the safest way possible, and that's why
schools closed, because what is best for the child is for these schools to be open. That is pretty clear. Ebony.
You want to keep the schools closed?
Ebony.
Thank you, Kayleigh. Just following on from Jeff's question, New York City officials today said that schools would go back in the fall on a staggered schedule of 2 to 3 days a week. I'm wondering if that's something that the administration and the president supports.
So I haven't spoken to him about that plan in particular, but it's encouraging anytime you see that some kids will be welcomed back onto the campus. Haven't spoken to him specifically about the New York scenario.
Another question. The Supreme Court is expected to rule tomorrow on whether or not the president can keep his financial records secret. I'm wondering if the court rules against the president, he will be happy to hand over his records to Congress and the Manhattan District Attorney.
So since that's a hypothetical, I won't answer that, and I'll wait to get back with you guys tomorrow after we see that ruling, which we hope is in the favor of the president. Yes?
Yes, 2 questions for you, Kayleigh. Thank you. Did the president ask the president of Mexico if he would pay for the wall, and what happened to that threat?
So that discussion did not come up when I was in the room.
Question, is the president still filing documents this week to be able to resign DACA once again and start the legal process?
Yeah, no announcements on that front, but when we have an announcement, you'll be the first to know. Chanel?
Thank you, Kayleigh. Going back to the executive orders that Meadows had mentioned earlier this week, is President Trump going to discuss with President Obrador any details about this executive order as he drafts it up, or as he?
So in the discussions I was a part of, there was not an executive order discussed. There will be some executive orders this week.
Can you give us a preview of what they might entail?
No preview, but there will be some this week. Yeah.
What about Justin Trudeau and his non-appearance today?
InsuranceMarket.ae has thousands of glowing Google reviews. Here they are.
What about Justin Trudeau and his non-appearance today?
Immigration. And with regard to drug interdiction, a lot of lives have been saved thanks to President Trump and President Obrador's cooperation.
There's nothing new that President Trump asked President López Obrador to do on immigration or the border.
So I won't get into their private details and private conversations other than to note that there's been great cooperation, and that was noted today. Yeah. Yes?
Thanks, Kayleigh. 2 questions. Following up on Jeff's question, you have, from behind the podium, talked about the importance of federalism, local and state officials being able to decide what to do with their own residents. How come when it comes to schools, the president is threatening schools, saying that if they don't follow his guidance in terms of what they should do in reopening, that he's going to threaten their funding? Why is that federalism principle not being followed?
Because he thinks that funding should go to the child. It should be there for children who are going to school. Keeping schools closed down is an untenable prospect, and if this administration is going to stand for anything, it's going to be standing against child abuse, which reporting falls when schools are closed. It's going to be standing for educational equality, because as noted by McKinsey and Company, I was reading some very detailed studies today that learning loss will probably be greatest if schools stay closed among low-income Black and Hispanic students. This president fights for school choice. He fights for opportunity. And he'll fight for schools to stay open because those disproportionately impacted are minority communities. High school dropout rates, that's another thing. We know that in the wake of school closures after Hurricane Katrina and Hurricane Maria, 14 to 20% of students never returned to school. And there's an estimate that 2 to 9% of high school students could drop out as a result of a permit. We'll stand on the side of our children.
Question.